Today's session is on the MRP module in Rover. All right, Rover's planning module is essentially, I like to say, is one of the modules that you want to get to. Now, you can use the planning module straight out of the box just by loading data based on sales order, production orders, and everything else, and the system will say, hey, you're short inventory, you should buy inventory. Before I go into that, I just want to kind of explain that the MRP piece in Rover is the more good information you associate to a part or enter into the parts master, the better information you're going to get from the planning side. And when I say better information, what I'm referring to are those values that you just mentioned. For example, lead times. If you know what lead times are, or set lead times, safety stock values. And in Rover safety stock values, you can actually put in a hard number that you want to ensure you have in stock on a monthly basis. Or you can actually also start getting a little bit fancy and start putting in variables within safety stock. Just like this help says, you can say, you can put a U and the number of months usage that you want to set as your monthly safety stock. So rather than setting a hard, I want to keep 100 units safety stock in the system every month, you can actually start getting into and entering like U3. So your safety stock for any month becomes your average usage, 3-month usage. Okay? So you have these values. Now, the QuickBooks, of course, doesn't have these values, but if you do have the values, and if you do have them at the part number level, then, we need to update. So what I'm trying to say is we've got to get the planning information, these values into the system to really utilize some of the more advanced functionality on the planning. But what I'm going to show you is just based off the data that's being converted and what's in the system now in Rover, what the planning does for you, okay? Just with basic information. So in other words, we have no lead times, we have no safety stocks. Basically, I've just loaded all your parts and told the system that part will be used in MRP, okay? So what MRP does is it takes into account all the other modules, inventory, production, sales, and marketing, and it compiles all that data and loads it into what I'm calling the MRP or planning module. There's a job that gets kicked off automatically nightly, because usually you'll run the MRP build once a day, so your figures don't change on you constantly. So it's usually set up to run at day end. You can certainly run it, like if you get a huge order into the system, you can always manually run the MRP.P1 job to rebuild the MRP files. So you can account for that huge sales order that just got entered. But it's usually an automatic nightly job. Now, when MRP P1 runs, what it's doing is it's based on all your purchase orders, sales orders, your work orders. It compiles all that information and what your current on-hand value is. and it builds the MRP files. This MRPR5 is one of the main reports that a buyer, a purchaser, would actually use. We're talking about buying, so this make buy status, which is associated by part, because easiest way to think about this field is everything you buy will be, of course, a B code, and that'll be any components, raw materials, or for that matter, just anything you purchase from a vendor. Assemblies will all be defined as M or make, okay? Because you're making that part in-house. Now, you can set it up to be for both make and a buy. Sometimes you make it, sometimes you buy it, okay? So you certainly have the ability to assign a part to either camp. But to keep things simple, I'm just going to say buy. So what we're going to do is look at all the parts in the system that is set up as a buy item. This is the report that MRP actually generates for you based off the data that's in the system. Now, what this action report is actually telling you is, for this part number, you have 0 on hand, you have 605 requirements, and your projected balance on that's going to be minus 605. So this column here, order quantity, is what the system's saying you need to buy of that part. Okay? So this is the report that a buyer would actually look, because this report's usually set up to run automatically and either get emailed or printed. And then the purchaser would come and look at this report to find all the action items for the day to figure out what they need to actually buy, because this report will actually tell you, hey, based on requirements in the system, you have 0 on hand, you better buy the part, right? Because it's telling you, based on what your on-hand inventory is, what you're going to be short based on requirements or demand. And I will show you what that requirement is. Now, this screen here, MRP.Q, is the main inquiry screen for the MRP planning module. Now, these columns here are dictated by a control file, which basically tells the system how you want to see your planning buckets. So I initially just set it up as week, so 4 weeks, and then monthly. Okay, and you'll see where this comes into play in a second. Okay, so you can change this at any time depending on how you want to see your planning buckets. And that screen I just showed you, which is week, month, is how the system calculates out your planning buckets. Now, you can see what the screen does. If you put in a part number, it'll tell you what you have on hand. It'll give you planning values that you have set up in the parts master. But the important piece is here, down in this section, because what this screen is telling you is you've got 6,544 units that are in your demand bucket. Now, demand is any requirement for this part in the system. So if we click on the demand tab, you can see where all that demand is coming from. Okay? So that part is being required for these sales orders that are in the system, and also from this work order. Okay? So demand in the system is defined as any transaction requiring that part. So what MRP is telling you is, for that part, you're going to be using this many units, and the demand tab will actually show you where that requirement's coming from. Okay, and the magnifying glass to go to the detail, okay, takes you to the transaction that's requiring that part, right? So that sales order here for the 20 is because that part was ordered for 20, right? So demand is requirements. So the system's telling you, hey, you've got 6,544 that's needed. It's in the past due bucket because of the date. I started out the date, today's date, so everything's thrown into the past due bucket. I'll show you how it'll look when it's in the future. But based on the demand that's in the system, it's telling you you're going to have a negative balance. So the system's calculating a planned order. So it's telling you, hey, you need to order 1,763 units to meet that shortfall. And so what the planning module is doing is, based on your inventory and future demand or current demand, it tells you what you need to buy. Okay? The detail tab will give you your projected balance of the inventory based on your demand. It's a little bit more detailed view. This on order bucket, of course, has an on order tab, because the on order will also account for any open purchase orders. If it's an assembly, any work orders, because MRP takes into account on order. So if the on order falls within that time bucket, of course, it's going to take that into account. And so it'll reduce, of course, your planned order. It also will create messages for you that tells you need to release a purchase order by 12/12 for this quantity to be available by 12/12. So, of course, we have no lead times, we have no other values, so the message that's going to be provided to you is going to be basic. But basically, what the system's saying is, you better order something by 12/12, because you're going to require it by 12/12, right? Because unless you have lead times, it can't calculate a release date, because the release date will be calculated based on when you can get the part, based on those planning variables. Now, everything here is all in one bucket, which is past due. If I was to rerun the MRP build again, except this time I'm going to put in a different date. I'm going to put in start date of, let's do 12/01/22. Okay, so I rebuilt my data. So if I go back into that MRP Q, now the screen kind of makes a little bit more sense because I started my planning bucket from December 1st. So now the demand falls into the appropriate weekly buckets. Okay? So based on your planning buckets, it does the calculations for you as far as what the planned order should be within that planning bucket in order to meet the requirements that fall within that planning bucket. Rover, it shows you the actuals, and you can actually add on top of that demand using sales forecasting, right? There's also independent demand to feed into the demand, okay? But your demand is actuals. It's showing you exactly what you need, so it doesn't smooth out those spikes. The sales work orders, so that's what's considered demand. But the numbers that you see here are purely actuals. So what you have as far as a sales order or a production order. The system will not show you any future or any projections unless you enter, like, for example, a sales forecast. I'll show you what a forecast looks like. At its simplest form, a sales forecast says, for this part number, on this date, I'm going to sell this many, right? So you're forecasting what you're going to be doing by month. And then whatever you put into this screen becomes demand here in your future buckets. Okay? And it takes into account actuals too at the same time in the calculations. So I think we got two things going on here. You're forecasting off of projections for future months because you've got to account for what you did or what you think is going to happen 90 days out because you got to order. You got to order everything now for everything within that window, correct?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I mean, so let me see if I can word this properly. So our projections aren't necessarily going off of actuals. Our projections are going off of averages. Now, we also, we will take, so to kind of redefine a little bit, like we will, when I order every month, Lewis goes into the part number and says, okay, we sold, let's say 10,000 units of this part number over the last 3 months. So that's going to be essentially, and then we divide that by 3. And that's going to give us, okay, on average, we're selling, 3,333 of these units per month. And then as a projection, if we're in kind of a hot cycle or if the economy's good, we'll say, okay, we're going to take that average number and we're going to add 10% onto that because I'm projecting that much growth over the next, say, 6 months. If we're in a slow cycle, we might slow that down and say, okay, here's our average sales per month. Let's add on another 5% because things are starting to slow down. If we're in, say, recession or when things are going down, I might say, okay, we're not going to project any growth. Let's just look at our average sales per month. So when we get this shipment, it's going to carry us through a month of sales. So getting back to like the demand or the actual, again, and maybe I'm not like speaking this super clearly, but what I'm looking to do or what I want to do is basically be able to adjust that actual number to have it be what our average sales are per month.
Well, in Rover, that would be setting your minimum to your average 2 months or whatever it is. Then you're fixing, you're telling the system based on your prior 2 months usage, I want this quantity in stock on any given month. That actually will feed safety stock as your average demand. Let me show you.
Yes, but then I need another month's worth of stuff to cover my monthly sales. I need that minimum stock there as kind of like a fallback. Remember I was saying earlier, in case we have a couple huge projects.
Okay, let me do this. I'm just going to set safety just to show you to 100 on that part, right? So now you can see where that demand feeds in. That's by creating safety stocks and all that's what's actually feeding in the demand, or where you can actually affect the demand number in MRP. That's not in actuals. Okay. So you have ways of setting and telling the system that you always want to have a certain level of inventory on hand. Okay. Through your safety stock, and you can set that level based on your usage. But it still gets fed into that demand number, which from what you're describing is you don't really want to see actuals. You want to see averages. So in other words, it's almost like you don't care what actuals are. You're basing all your buying off of averages. True?
In a way. Yeah.
And that goes completely against what Rover's doing. Rover's just doing actuals. Now, can that be changed to averages? Certainly, if we have the values to calculate what that average should be, and you've basically said it's 2 months prior usage, right?
Well, so our safe stock level is based on an average of 2 months worth of sales. But like when we look at what our monthly sales are, we usually look at either a 3 or a 6 month period. If it's an item that we've sold for a long time, we want to look at, okay, what's the 6 months average? If it's an item that's relatively newer, then we'll try to get, okay, what's a 3-month average on this? And the way, again, like one of the reasons, or I guess the primary reason that I do it that way is to make sure we're not overstocking an item.
So okay. So
I mean,
rather
one thing that I can do too, Jesse, is I can just send you one of the spreadsheets that we use. It's
yeah,
not.
send me one of your spreadsheets, because the one thing I'm just trying to figure out how we're gonna do, because essentially what you've been, from what I've understood from what you've been telling me, is you're not looking at actuals. You're looking at your 6-month period average.
Yeah.
By month. So that's what you're wanting to use as your demand.
Yeah.
And use that average number, compare that to, your balance, your inventory balances, and then system will tell you buy this quantity based on the average.
Yes.
Ugh.
So, Lewis, can you just send me, like, I don't know, maybe the most recent KOK number? Yeah, I'm sorry. You don't have to update it. Just resend me the one that you did earlier this month.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I need to think on that one, on how we can accomplish how you are looking at your planning, and how we can actually try to make that work within Rover.
So one other thing, Jesse, let's stay on this screen. So in the column that you're in, so the demand, when it gets to when we're in the balance and it says negative 1831, that's balance as of what? Balance as of a week from that date?
Balance as of that date that.
What you have set as the end date.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, so ours will be, and I'm not saying we reprogram this all now, but like ours would be, for example, if we're looking at the data today, like our start date might be 12/21, but then our end date is going to be March 21. So I want to be able to see, okay, what's the balance? What do we think we're going to have 3 months from now?
Okay. Send me that Excel. Because essentially what you're saying is this.
Hi, Terry. The KOK ordering date already sent you by email.
Okay, thank you.
that's the kind of view you're essentially planning, right?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, let me look at your Excel. Let me look at the options available and see what we need to do to change this demand
Okay.
and see what the opportunities are on how we can do that. But at the overall MRP within Rover, you understand, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So you're actually buying off a forecast. Your projections. That's
Yeah.
really good. A lot of people are not. A majority are not buying off projections because your projections. I mean, you're doing it based on actuals, but a lot of people are. Well, not a lot, but a lot of customers I know, they can't set those projections. They don't want to put hard numbers on it, right? That's why they're using actuals for the
Yeah.
demand. So
Yeah, I mean, and the what's the right word? Nomenclature, like, so yes, you're correct. Like, I'm not actually going off of actuals, but I'm using actual numbers to create projections.
yeah. Okay. Okay, let me review that some more, and then we can scope out a plan on how Rover can be used for the planning. Certainly from day one, I don't think the MRP is going to be all that helpful because we still got to do the if any modifications are required. So you still have your Excels. Right now, you're plugging the information into the Excel, right? Or is it pretty static?
I apologize, Jesse. Can you repeat that?
Right now, because as of go live, it seems MRP is not going to work the way that you need it to work. You're still going to be able to do your projections that you have now, right? Based off your Excel.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
I told Ron, like, I don't know, I'm 47, almost 50. Like, I'm in that hybrid kind of generation. Like, I trust software to a point, but it's like, I even told Ron, I was like, it might take me a year before I trust MRP. Like, we might continue doing it. I want to take baby steps with it just because,
Okay.
I've got a system that works. Yes, it would be great if we can automate more of it, but I definitely would be sort of taking our time with this anyway.
Okay. Well, the figures on the MRP, I can tell you is rock solid. If it says you need to plan, you need to order, then you need to order. But it's all based off of actuals. So with that said, but the figures I know is that leap of faith of when the system says you should buy this many. At the MRP side, the module is rock solid. That I know. So we just have to figure out what we can do to make it work within the model that you're using. So
okay. Well, whenever we get to that point, I'm not necessarily I'm not a deeply religious person, but I'll be praying to something.
That is MRP. Let me show you the end goal. Okay, this is just the inquiry. Okay, to show you what the system said you should order. The end goal of this whole MRP process or module, where you want to be in use, and this is what I try to get everyone to use, is this screen. plan.e, because plan.e, I'm going to include buy items. What plan.e does, based on the MRP figures, these quantities here is what the system said you should buy. So if I open this in MRP again, this 1763 is here. See the 200, the 100 here is the next line. So what plan.e is doing, based off the MRP data, it's showing you from this screen what you need to buy. So then you can come in here and tell the system which parts that the system recommended you to buy, and by releasing it and saving it, it automatically creates the purchase order for that part for the vendor. So from this one screen, you can actually create all the purchase orders for all the different vendors based on what the system said you should buy. This is the screen that you ultimately, if you start using MRP, you want to be at. Because from this one screen, you can create all the purchase orders all at one shot to all the different vendors that you tell the system. Rather than going in PO.E for each vendor and entering the part number and the quantity and so on. Okay, so this is the planner screen. So from this one screen, and you can filter it by specific part number, or for that matter, specific vendors. Let's say, you know, you're buying by vendor, so you can limit it to only those vendors' parts. And then you can select the ones that you want to create a purchase order for, and then you just save it. And it does all the validations for you, right? Like no price found for this part, which means there's no PO price, right? But it creates the purchase order for you. So 6. So if I go into PO.E for 6, there's that part, there's that quantity. So the system through plan.E feeds the purchasing module. Okay? So this plan.E is the ultimate goal of using MRP, because it gives you one screen, gives the buyer one screen to go to create all the POs necessary, rather than going in and using PO.E one by one. Okay? Now, on the production side, you can use the planning tool for production too. Let's say right now the system's set up to automatically create work orders, but let's say in the future you decide you want to see what all the demand is first, and then you want to create one work order to fulfill all the demand for the sales orders. You can actually use the planning module to do that too. Rather, you know, creating one bulk work order rather than individual work orders. But this plan.E, this is the screen that I try to get everyone to, because this is the main screen that a buyer can actually issue purchase orders all at one shot, rather than having to create individual purchase orders.